Ladies and gentlemen,
I've not been up here for a couple of weeks.
No!
Quite a lot has happened.
Where's he been?
Quite a lot has happened in the world, so I wanted to talk about some of that, and then some of the research and stuff like that.
do you still think we're all going to die of COVID? Like you did 5 years ago?
I never said that we're all going to die of that. On the contrary, what I said was, I said it would be over in a few weeks, but there would be a rapid process of disease and death. That's what I thought, and I was wrong, you know. But I'll come back to that in a little while, because I wanted to talk more about what's happening in the world, which I haven't spoken about for a little while, and I thought, as there's so much turmoil taking place, instigated supposedly by Donald Trump, that I wanted to address that. So firstly, I should say that although I have no affinity with Donald Trump,
Me neither, but I love him.
I do find the way he behaved towards Vladimir Zelensky to be very funny and very appropriate.
Yes.
And very appropriate.
Yes.
Better than Netflix.
Because for years
Do you trust
we were told, in fact, funny enough, the story about us fighting for the freedom of Ukraine began almost exactly the same week as the end of coronavirus crisis. You might remember. In fact, the indicator that they were about to remove the restrictions on movement, on freedoms, on vaccination to come to the country, all that was removed the week that the war in Ukraine began. And in fact, before they removed the restrictions, they explicitly gave an exception for people from Ukraine to come to England, whether they were vaccinated or not. Because in Ukraine, at that time, most people were hostile to the COVID restrictions and were refusing, or many of them, were refusing to get vaccinated and didn't believe the story. The Ukrainians at that time were quite skeptical. Like a lot of the people in Eastern Europe, you know, it generally was the case that in Albania, in Romania, and in Russia, and in Ukraine, most people didn't really believe the hype. But once the war started, and all of a sudden the restrictions on the population here were removed, most people in Britain, you know, they were prepared to go along with this ridiculous idea that we were fighting a tyrant in Russia, and that was a distant struggle, and now we were free. Don't forget, this was spring of 2022. They suddenly said, you are now free, but we're at war with a new enemy. No longer is the enemy a virus, now the enemy is a fascist dictator in Russia. The man we were dealing with only a few days before, the man we had a pipeline from Russia to Europe to supply the gas and oil. Now all of a sudden, Britain, America, Germany, Europe were preparing to fight the last desperate stand against dictators in Europe. By the way, in the COVID era, although some people will say to you, COVID was a communist conspiracy, it's quite interesting to note that Belarus, often accused of being a remnant of communism, didn't impose any restrictions at all during the coronavirus pandemic.
How many died?
And there's no indication that any more people died of any causes in Belarus than in any other country. And therefore, in fact, generally less than in Western Europe. Therefore, the attribution is important. But that's not really what I'm here to talk about today. I'm here to talk about world geopolitics, because that's shaping the world today. Why would the Americans suddenly turn against the Europeans? Why would Donald Trump, deal maker, capitalist par excellence, surrounded by a coterie of billionaires, why would he turn against Europe? Is it because Europe has got some dictatorial views on free speech? Well, not really, although some of them have restrictive views. It's not really the issue. Is it because Britain has got Tommy Robinson in prison, as some Elon Musk complains about? He doesn't really give a damn about it. Is it really because Europe has got a cultural attitude that is more liberal and that the Americans don't? It's not that either. It's because Europe, economically, is bigger than America. An American capital will not tolerate an enemy. And there are two major enemies, in fact, three major enemies. Number one enemy of America, economically, is Europe. The European Union, led by Germany, seconded by France, and dominating the global economy in terms of its total weight. But it is weak internally. It has no internal unification. It is not a European Union unified like the American United States of America. It is many separate countries pulling in different directions, held together by a financial union, a monetary union, with some legal controls, which, by the way, nearly every country in Europe has ignored. The legal regulations that's supposed to make them a single unified or move them towards a single unified government. And so America is going for what it believes is the weak point in its strongest, weakest enemy. Strongest economically, weakest politically, weakest in terms of its internal unity. And by the way, that's why Donald Trump supports Nigel Farage and supported Brexit, is because it also was a mechanism for undermining the number one competitor to the United States of America, which was the European Union economically. Now, the real enemy of the United States of America is the People's Republic of China. But in order to deal with China or take on China, it has to be able to undermine the number one competitor with America now economically, which is Europe. And Europe can easily be undermined. And they've done so. They got them scuttling off, throwing their weapons and money towards Ukraine. Remember this, I remember 2014, when Ukraine war began. Yes, 2014, not 2022.
Yeah,
and if you watch,
Ukraine started bombing their own people in Donbass.
Yes.
Ukraine started the war, and now the governments of Europe want us to believe that Russia is the threat. No, our own governments are the threat. They want to steal your tax money and kill innocent children. Don't fall for it.
In the discussion,
Ukraine, Zelensky is a Zionist, a godless cunt. He's killing his own God-conscious people. Unfortunately, the synagogue of Satan rules the world today until Jesus returns.
Thank you very much for that contribution of yours. Thank you very much. You can leave the Jesus returns, each to their own.
And I believe Muslims and Christians should unite. We have so much more in common than anyone would perceive. Why don't we unite? We both believe Jesus is returning, and when Jesus returns, he'll tell us who is right. And then we'll follow
There are a
him.
number of speakers listening to that point of view over there. This is a political meeting.
I'm going to carry on about the oppression of Ukraine on some people.
I will. So in the debate between Donald Trump and Zelensky, it was notable that they all accepted that the war did not begin in 2022. Zelensky was talking about 2019, and what happened there? the Russians refused to abide by the agreements in 2019, and the war continued. That's what he was saying. In other words, the war began in 2014. And America and Germany and Britain sent weapons and manpower, military advisors to Ukraine to try to conquer the Donbass area and to undermine the Russian speakers in that area. They took away the right to speak Russian. They took away their cultural rights. And they attacked that area, which was the dominant economic area in Ukraine. The basket of industry in Ukraine is in the east, not in the west. The west had the lowest living standards in the whole of Europe, about $300 a month, the earnings of the people in western Ukraine. And remember, Victoria Nuland, remember the recording from 2014, where she was recorded by the intelligence agencies of Russia, who broadcast it. And there she said, you know what? This is the key. She said, you know what? Excuse my language, but this is what she said. She said, you know what? Fuck the Europeans, she said. That's what she said about when they refused to, when they had their agenda as to who they wanted in power. And at that time, the Americans and the Europeans were united in their objective to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ukraine. And that's exactly what they did in 2014. They organized a coup d'etat on the Maidan Square, overthrew the elected government, who was pro-Russian. And then they declared, oh my God, the Russians have tried to establish a dictatorship over Ukraine. That's how mad the inversion of reality is. And since that time, when the crisis escalated in 2022, and the Russians went in militarily, then we are told, well, that's when the war began. Yet everybody, even Zelensky, admitted the war began in 2014. And we were behind. I lived in East Germany when East Germany fell, when the Berlin Wall fell. And I remember at the time they made the agreement to unify Germany, they stated, the British, the Americans, the French, and the Russians all agreed, but the British, Americans, and French, they all said, NATO will not move 1 centimetre east of the Oder-Neisse boundary. In other words, of Germany. Not 1 centimetre east of Germany. And yet they moved in. Sorry?
Where was that documented? Because I've been challenged whether that
I can't remember. I look on ChatGPT or something. I don't remember. I remember it being discussed in the news at the time when I was in East Germany. But I'll look it up for you for next week. I don't have it. I don't have it on the tip of my tongue, the evidence for that now. But you can check that all yourselves. You're all educated people. You can all look on a computer and do a search. You'll find the information on that. So now I read this thing this morning. What was it? I had a minute ago. I dropped it. Give it back. Yes. So I got this off the internet this morning, and it's by some of the leading thinkers in the US AI sphere. It's Dan Hendricks, Eric Schmidt, and Alexander Wang. And they're proposing a new strategy because we're no longer at war by hardware alone. That's what we've seen in the war in Ukraine. We've got all the technology, we've got the drones, we've got the laser-guided missiles, we've got the Starlink, we've got the satellite communication, we've got G5, we've got advanced bombs, and yet how are they fighting warfare? In trenches. Just like the First World War. Come in a wee bit, my voice is a little bit low, but I'll move towards you a little bit. We're back in the trenches of the First World War. That's where the technological warfare has taken us. And now they're saying they've got a new strategy. Because war is going to be fought, according to them, by artificial intelligence. You know, you go on the ChatGPT, you go on their latest AI bots, you go on this Quen or on DeepSeek and so on, and you find out ways to discover discrete pieces of information, and then you use that information from the point of view of the establishment. They've had this level for several years, and they can combine together drones, satellite vision, laser-guided missiles, and they can launch a war and slaughter people, both externally and internally, in order to control the world. And that's what the game is here. They are now saying they want not what we used to have in the Cold War, mutually assured destruction, where you would blow up the enemy and they would blow you up, and that's what prevents you from going to war. Now they're saying they want something called mutually assured AI malfunction. And the aim of them is to control the development of artificial intelligence such that they make an agreement. That's what they hope. They make an agreement between China, Europe, America and Russia to make sure none of them gets too far ahead, so that they don't use their asymmetric dominance of artificial intelligence to eradicate the enemy. And how would they eradicate the enemy? They would take over the information systems governing the structure of society. They would take over the financial system, populate it with viruses, turn them on at a moment of choice, take over computer viruses, take over the missile systems, take over command and control, the layer between the generals and the implementation of warfare at the grassroots. Take over that. Take over the same modelling systems in the economy. And in that way crash your opposing economy and take over yourselves, sweep up the marketplace yourself. And then run a campaign of artificial intelligence in which you have Donald Trump and Xi Jinping arguing in a room like Zelensky and Donald Trump, but with 100 iterations, like we've seen in the last 2 weeks. Hundreds of different videos produced of Zelensky and Trump arguing, debating. In some, Zelensky punches Donald Trump. In other, Donald Trump attacks Zelensky. In some, they say one thing. In others, they got Xi Jinping and Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin singing "We are the world." All of these artificial intelligence produced videos can be used in future as the mechanism for dominating the information dissemination in the world and making you think that what they are doing is something completely different from what's actually taking place. And we know this. This is where it comes in with COVID. Is during COVID, the 77th Brigade of the British military were employed by the government, the CIA, the American Army, were employed to manipulate the world's population and spread panic and fear at a scale unknown in human history to dominate the minds of the people, leading for nearly 2 years for people to voluntarily, when backed by that psychological warfare manipulation, stay at home and lock themselves in prison at home. To abolish schooling, abolish interaction, abolish family, abolish love, all these things were carried out by the algorithms that they had at their disposal 5 years ago. You don't think what the governments and states had at their disposal 5 years ago is as powerful as you have at your disposal now? Of course it was. And in fact, right back in 1994, during the war in the early 90s, during the war in Yugoslavia, they used deepfake videos then to justify the war between Croatia and the Bosnians, between Croatia and Serbia. They used deepfake videos then, telling people lies with the faces of their enemies, telling their people lies about what was actually happening. And so they're always a few years ahead of how the general population. Of course, how can they not be? What's the end game, Mr. Speaker? The end game is complete domination of the earth by a handful of billionaires. And by the way, one of the most interesting developments in AI is the development of open source software AI. At the time when the internet was developed, it was primarily based on what is open source? Open source means that all the information that codes the structure of this machine, of this artificial intelligence response machine, all of that is open, accessible, and amendable. All rational thinking people in the world today should be fighting to make sure that all AI is open source, because otherwise you never know how it will be used against you. And they all scream, you know, all these people, the billionaires of the United States of America, including Donald Trump, including Elon Musk, and the rest of them. They all scream about the sanctity of private property. Communism means the end of private property, according to them. And yet, what have they done? What have they done with artificial intelligence? What does ChatGPT get its information from? It's entirely stolen from all of you. Where does Google get its information from, its power and wealth from? It steals everything you do on your machine from you, and it uses it against you. At the moment, they only use it, apparently, for most of you, for advertising. But they also, there's an office in in Soho Square, number 20, Palantir. Palantir is an operation, the most evil capitalist company in the world, providing its services to monitor, track, and kill anybody in the world that governments pay them to provide the information to do this for. And the main backing the main example of their activity is what they do in Palestine. They monitor the people of Palestine. They watch for their sentiment, how their moods are changing, and if they happen to be in a bad mood or unhappy, then they're likely to be detained by the Israeli intelligence agencies at border control points because they might commit suicide bombing. That's the way in which these technologies are being used by the ruling classes today. And so when they say they're against communism, don't believe a word of it. Their supposed hostility to dictatorial communism, as they call it. They have accumulated all the private knowledge in the world and declared it to be theirs. That's why the musicians last week launched a petition, a blank album they launched, didn't they? The blank album was a statement. You are stealing everything we ever made. You are stealing it and calling it yours. The same in architecture, the same in art, the same in culture, the same in knowledge. All of it is being stolen just as surely as the Brinks-Mat robbers stole the gold at Heathrow Airport, or people go to Hatton Garden and steal the jewellery and then they melt it down or break it down and reformat it and sell it on as an unstolen product. That's how AI is being used by the establishment to plunder the resources. On the contrary, I am arguing. On the contrary,
I'm a Ned Ludd supporter. When are we going to get spun out and just put it in the gears? When are we going to do that?
I am arguing that the open source model that has been released by the Chinese is the foundation for an alternative model of how to use the technologies being developed today
China
for
steals
the
millions
benefit
of pounds
of humanity.
of intellectual property every year from
Well,
America.
it's nothing compared. I mean, what China basically, when they moaned about intellectual property stolen by the Chinese, they were talking about that person who wandered around the pubs selling DVDs that were copied. That's what they were talking about. We are now talking about all the films.
They're stealing blueprints to make fighter
all the
jets, Mr. Speaker.
videos,
They're not stealing like
all the
DVDs.
computer programs. Sorry?
They're stealing blueprints for how to build like stealth bombers. They're not stealing DVDs. I think you're missing the. I don't know if you. saw that.
On the contrary, all the artificial intelligence entities are seeking to gather all the information in the world, whether it be stealth bombers or someone's personal computer information. It doesn't make any difference. The principle is exactly the same, and the only way around it is open source foundation for the future of technology. As you can hear, my voice is going. I'm going to take you quickly and then.
And just what was the open source that China put forward that you mentioned?
Well,
and is it genuinely open source?
DeepSeek is one. Quen is another. There's another one about to come or coming out now. I think it's called Manos or something like that. Come out last couple of days. The Alibaba is Quen. How do you know it's open source? Because you can download it. You can download it and build on it yourself. That's how you know. And you can go through it. The source code is the coding. You download that coding and you can test every parameter on it.
Well, you can't unless you've got a system that can run the source code. You can download the source code.
You can run a 55 billion.
Load it back up to a system that can run it. You can't do anything.
You can run it. They're bringing out a computer in a couple of months' time, which will be able to run 200 billion bits. In order to, so that would nearly be at the level of Quen or ChatGPT.
What do you think is going to happen in Taiwan, Mr. Speaker?
You can run a lower level ChatGPT.
What's going to happen in Taiwan? I don't care about his voice breaking. Keep at it. have a drink of water. I want to know what's going to happen in Taiwan. Can you tell us? I want to hear. I hear there's storm clouds brewing in Taiwan. Storm clouds
How
are
did we
brewing
tell
over
you about Taiwan?
Enlighten us, Mr. Speaker.
The Taiwanese make a lot of the chips, which are the foundation for modern AI. One of the reasons the Chinese developed DeepSeek is because they didn't have access to those chips, and therefore they made their own chips, which they've developed quite successfully. And America now wants to challenge China over these questions. So although I thought a war over Taiwan is unlikely in the near future, and I still think that's also true. I think the Americans first want to break the Europeans and then move on to China when they gain technological superiority over China. At the moment, we are in a situation like 1961, where the Soviets were ahead of the West in the key technology. And so the Americans have to launch a new program to overtake the Chinese in artificial intelligence. They'll have a job doing it because the Chinese systems, because they're open source, are a lot easier to amend and adjust and develop. And by the way, even those AI systems that are dominating in the United States of America are generally have a very large number of programmers and software engineers who are from the People's Republic of China. So their loyalty cannot be guaranteed to the American system. So we are at war in which artificial intelligence, economic power. Sorry. I am on the side of a war by the mass of the working people to learn how to use these technologies, just the same as a soldier, when they go to war, they are taught how to take apart a weapon, how to put it back together, how to service it, and how to use it. So we now need to train the mass of working people to use these technologies themselves, based on open source technology, in order for the masses, the third force, not the nations, but the third force, the mass of working people, to take over the running of the administration of society themselves.
We need to create a new world system.
You go yourself onto your computer.
Mr. Speaker,
you look on Quen, you look on GPT, you look on Claude or whatever other AI programs there, and ask them this: is it possible for the mass of people to take over the running of production using AI and to raise the living standards of humanity and expropriate the billionaires and run society democratically, with privacy, with secrecy, without invasive surveillance? Can you do this? How could it be done? You will find the answers are quite compelling, and I ask you to do that. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Here, here.